The 2nd of September 2019, Oulu, northern Finland. 12-year-old Leah Mekala left the school building of Kakurinkula after the end of classes and went to the bus stop. A few minutes later, no one saw her anymore. The only clue? A white Volkswagen transporter van that disappeared from surveillance cameras just 11 minutes after the girl was seen next to it. The 2nd of September 2019 in Oulu was gloomy. This is typical weather for the beginning of autumn in northern Finland. Cool air, grey clouds, drizzle. School classes ended exactly at 3 o'clock. Leah Mekala, a 6th grade student, left the building together with her classmates. But unlike them, she didn't go home but to the bus stop. Witnesses later confirmed that Leah stood alone at the stop. In her hands, she held a bright pink backpack that witnesses remembered well. Exactly this backpack later became the most important clue in the first hours of the search. Around 3:05, one of the passing drivers noticed how a white van of the Volkswagen transporter brand stopped next to Leah. The vehicle stood out for nothing unusual, except for the complete absence of license plates on the front. The witness attached no importance to this and thought the license plates were simply dirty. However, this was the first in a series of errors that would later complicate the investigation. External cameras recorded what happened at the stop, but the recording quality left much to be desired. Nevertheless, exactly at 3:06 on the tape, Leah's figure can be clearly seen next to the van's door. The girl seemed to hesitate for a second. Then, the recording breaks due to interference. When the image is restored, the van has disappeared. 11 minutes later, cameras recorded the same transporter at an intersection heading toward the city center. Then the vehicle disappeared without a trace from video surveillance view. From this moment on, Leah Mekala was not seen again. The investigation team arrived at the scene already half an hour after the disappearance. The area was cordoned off. Crime scene technicians carefully examined every meter of asphalt and the roadside area. Exactly then, the first discovery appeared that brought important details to the still unclear case. A clear tire print with an unusual tread pattern. After checking databases, it turned out to be Nokian Hakkapeliitta R2. Not a very common model for the year 2019, but it was officially sold in Oulu. The track was fresh and fit perfectly with the van's suspected direction of travel. Another important fragment was a small piece of transparent cellophane found in a trash can 10 meters from the stop. On the piece was written with a marker, Leah M. Investigators quickly determined that this was part of the packaging of Leah's personal items that the girl used at school. Someone had obviously disposed of this cellophane only recently. That same day, questioning of the girl's closest circle began. Both her classmates and her teachers were called for conversation. One of the boys remembered that the history and geography teacher Risto Hämäläinen had behaved unusually in the morning. He was nervous, got annoyed over small things, and for some reason left school hurriedly before the end of his shift. Hämäläinen had never shown such behavior before, so the investigation became suspicious. His name quickly appeared on the list of persons of interest for the investigation. But the police also had another candidate for the role of suspect. It was Petteri Serku, an older man who lived opposite the school. Petteri had long complained about the noise of school children, and neighbors had regularly noticed his white Volkswagen transporter parked in front of his house. A few hours after Leah's disappearance, police knocked on Serku's door. A small amount of alcohol was detected in his blood, 0.3 per ml, which however did not prevent him from making clear statements. Petteri was visibly nervous and got tangled in details. First, he claimed to have seen nothing unusual, but then unexpectedly explained that he had observed Leah getting into a strange van unknown to him. This quick change of statement was suspicious, but investigators did not rush to conclusions for the time being. Simultaneously, crime scene technicians began analyzing surveillance camera data and checking eyewitness statements. In the first hours, the statements seemed contradictory and unhelpful. But then a new detail appeared in Serku's statements. In the 32nd minute of questioning, he unexpectedly named the person he allegedly saw at the wheel of that very transporter. Serku identified history teacher Risto Hämäläinen with certainty. This statement completely changed the course of the questioning. Suddenly, the focus of investigation was no longer the older, dissatisfied neighbor, but an educator whom no one had previously imagined in the role of suspect. Police had to urgently reconsider their priorities. Nevertheless, they did not exclude the possibility that Serku might have lied to deflect suspicion from himself. Teacher Risto Hämäläinen did not yet know that in a few minutes, he would have to explain his unexpected disappearance in the middle of the school day. By this time, the residents of Oulu already knew that something serious had happened in the city. Social networks quickly filled with rumors, and the city administration hurried to assure that active search measures were underway. Meanwhile, investigators prepared to clarify details from the life of the teacher who until this day had been known only for his exemplary behavior and reserved character. They understood that the most important thing was not to lose time while the tracks were still fresh, and the suspects could not destroy evidence or coordinate their versions. And each of the officers investigating the case already understood. The key to solving this story would be the person sitting opposite the investigator in the small interrogation room. Risto Hämäläinen, teacher of history and geography, had submitted his resignation just a few hours before Leah's disappearance. At that time, none of his colleagues knew about it. Police had to understand why he decided to quit on this day and at exactly this time. Documents from the accounting department of Kaakkurinkula School quickly confirmed. Hämäläinen had submitted his official resignation at 14:12, almost an hour before Leah was last seen at the bus stop. It turned out that his decision could not possibly have been triggered by Leah's disappearance itself. It had been made in advance. Colleagues and acquaintances described Hämäläinen as a reserved, somewhat strange, but generally friendly person. He had worked at the school for almost 10 years, enjoyed respect, and had never attracted attention through suspicious behavior. In recent months, however, according to the principal, the teacher had become more nervous and distracted. He missed meetings, avoided meetings with parents, didn't answer the phone for long periods. He answered colleagues' questions briefly, reluctantly, and avoided eye contact. However, no one considered these details important until Leah disappeared. An additional moment of suspicion was the strange behavior of Hämäläinen's phone. The analysis of mobile tower data revealed that his phone was switched off for a long 28 hours directly after Leah's disappearance. For the police, this was an important detail. The phone did not record its location precisely when it was especially necessary. During the day, when police and volunteers thoroughly combed the streets of Oulu and the surrounding areas, the teacher was unreachable for anyone. On the third day, investigators received a new, crucial tip. Speed control cameras on Highway E57 had captured the familiar white Volkswagen transporter belonging to Hämäläinen, 170 kilometers north of Oulu in the direction of the city of Rovaniemi. The vehicle's passage time coincided with the period when the teacher's mobile phone was switched off. The investigators understood. Technically, the teacher could well have made the trip to Rovaniemi and back during this time. Based on this data, the police decided to examine the white van. In the cargo area of the transporter, investigators found a suspicious package that was carefully tied with adhesive tape. Upon opening, several children's books were discovered, which aroused even more suspicion. Who and why needed children's books in the cargo area of a single middle school teacher? However, questioning relatives and colleagues partially clarified this question. It turned out that Hämäläinen had already given similar books to his niece a year earlier, at Christmas 2018. Investigators quickly verified this fact, and the suspicious find turned into a false trail that led astray. But despite the formally explained package, the teacher's alibi remained ambiguous and shaky. The police understood that the mere explanation about a gift for a relative was not sufficient to dispel suspicion. The next strange detail emerged after Hämäläinen's phone reappeared on the network. The teacher had still not returned to school. He had neither called colleagues nor students, nor communicated the reasons for his absence. This silence triggered a wave of rumors among teachers and parents. Meanwhile, police officers tried to understand what exactly the teacher might have done in Rovaniemi. Cameras and witnesses registered his presence in the city only once, in a hardware store, K-Router. Security camera footage and the cashier's statements confirmed that the teacher personally bought insulation material and plywood sheets. The purchase looked completely normal, except that Hämäläinen paid exclusively with cash. This immediately made it impossible to track the transaction through bank cards. In the year 2019, cash payments in Finland were still quite common and did not arouse suspicion in themselves. But in this case, it made it difficult for police to determine the exact purpose and circumstances of the purchase. The police requested and received access to the store's video recordings and receipts. At the time of purchase, Hämäläinen appeared calm, focused, and showed no signs of excitement or fear. The video recording confirmed. He knew exactly what and what for he was buying. The store employees also noticed nothing suspicious about his behavior. Nevertheless, the investigation understood that this purchase could be directly connected to Leah's disappearance. Investigators carefully examined possible scenarios, considering the distance of the journey and the type of materials acquired. The police's next task was obvious: to determine where and for what purpose Hämäläinen might have gone with the plywood and insulation material after visiting the store. On the cameras, he was alone, but the question of whether someone else was in the car or waiting for him at another location remained unanswered for now. While police and volunteers continued to comb the suburban areas and forests around Rovaniemi and Oulu, investigators prepared for the next phase of work, detailing the teacher's route after purchasing the building materials. They already understood that they now had to move quickly. Time was passing. Evidence might have been destroyed, and by this point, Hämäläinen understood very well that he was being closely watched. And while police carefully checked where exactly the purchased plywood and insulation material had been delivered, everyone following this case was certain. The key to solving the mystery of Leah's disappearance lay exactly where the teacher was last seen. Several months after Leah disappeared, inexplicable changes occurred in her family's life. In June 2020, police received unexpected information from bank employees. Leah's parents had suddenly and completely paid off their mortgage. The payment amount, 42,000 euros in cash, without any documents about the money's origin. The parents were immediately called for a conversation at the police station. Leah's father, Marko Mäkelä, and her mother, Julia Mäkelä, seemed genuinely surprised. They claimed to have no idea who exactly had paid their debts. To the police, these words sounded strange at the very least. In a small town where everyone knows everyone, the sudden receipt of such a large cash sum could not help but arouse suspicion. The manager of the Nordea branch in Oulu shared details of the strange payment with police. According to his words, about a week before Leah's parents' visit, an unknown man of medium height came to the bank, whose face was partially covered by a baseball cap. The man quickly and without many words laid bundles of cash bills totaling exactly 42,000 euros on the table and said this was payment of the Mäkelä family mortgage. He presented no identification documents, but the bank was not formally obligated to request them either. The only thing left for the investigation were the banknote numbers. Checking the serial numbers quickly yielded an important result. This money had been received in cash only 12 days before payment at a bank in the city of Rovaniemi, exactly the city where teacher Risto Hämäläinen had previously been. Police turned once again to Hämäläinen's figure. The teacher had already been the main suspect for several months, but without solid evidence. Investigators did not exclude the possibility that this money could have been ransom, or it was a way to silence possible suspicions of the family. But exactly at this moment, the case took a different turn. The mass media, having learned about the large sum and its mysterious origin, began actively spreading a completely different version. The Mekala family might have staged Leah's disappearance themselves to receive financial help or compensation. The scandal quickly gained momentum. Local journalists lurked for hours in front of the Mekala family house to be first to get exclusive details. The family's reputation was in danger. The investigation had to make considerable efforts to check this version. Leah's parents' house was searched again. All their personal belongings, computers, phones, and correspondence were examined. But after several days of careful examination, police found nothing that would even remotely confirm suspicions of staging. This version seemed quickly to be false. However, it proved far more difficult to stop the wave of rumors and gossip than to complete the official verification. Exactly at this critical moment for the Mekala family came a new, extremely important find from specialists of Finland's national police. When checking the banknotes handed over at the bank, experts discovered a clear fingerprint on one of the banknotes. Verification of the fingerprint in the Interior Ministry database yielded a clear match. The fingerprint belonged to Risto Hämäläinen. This discovery completely changed the direction of the investigation. If teacher Hämäläinen was previously suspected of kidnapping, he was now directly connected to a large sum of money intended for Leah's family. It became obvious that the version of a possible staging of the disappearance by the Mekala family could not withstand criticism. On the contrary, a new puzzle emerged. How could a middle school teacher have 42,000 euros in cash? And most importantly, why did he decide to use this money specifically to help Leah's family? The investigation, which had previously focused on Hämäläinen's movements after Leah's disappearance, now began actively checking his financial transactions of recent years. They quickly established that the teacher's salary did not allow him to save such a sum without additional sources of income. There were also no significant deposits or withdrawals on the suspect's bank accounts. At the same time, the police also investigated other aspects of Hämäläinen's private life, trying to find a connection between his possible actions and Leah's family. Perhaps the teacher was trying in this way to atone for guilt or confuse the investigation, to divert attention from himself. But all this remained for now only versions without evidence. Meanwhile, the pressure on the Mekala family in the city gradually decreased. The parents continued to insist that they did not know the reason for this generous and mysterious gift. Despite all the complexity of the situation, the police tended to believe that the family actually had nothing to do with the money. However, this made the search for the teacher's motive even more difficult. The next task of the investigation was already clear: to find out where Hämäläinen had received the money. For the public, only one thing was obvious for now. The family tragedy that began with Leah's strange disappearance was surrounded by increasingly confused and strange circumstances, behind which stood a man who was considered a quiet and inconspicuous schoolteacher. 2nd of September 2022, exactly 3 years after Leah's disappearance, an unexpected call came to the emergency center. Petteri Sirku, the school's neighbor who had meanwhile moved to the village of Tatsi, reported strange sounds coming from the grounds of an abandoned sawmill on the edge of the locality. According to Sirku, it was a dull, periodically recurring cough that sounded as if it belonged to a very young person. The dispatcher immediately sent the nearest patrol car crew to the scene. The call recording was automatically saved. When listening carefully, a prolonged, deep cough could be clearly heard in the background of Sirku's voice. There was hardly any doubt about the truthfulness of the report. The police car reached the location after 17 minutes. The sawmill, which had been closed more than 10 years ago, looked neglected and dilapidated. The officers began inspecting the premises. On one of the buildings, they immediately noticed an unusual detail. A ventilation pipe in the foundation had obviously been recently repaired. The edges of the opening were roughly worked and closed with a self-made metal grate that was fastened with ordinary screws. It was obvious that the work had been carried out recently and very quickly. The patrol officers found themselves in a difficult situation. One of the officers suggested immediately opening the building and checking the basement, suspecting that there might be someone inside who urgently needed help. The other insisted on following protocol and waiting for an official search warrant so as not to endanger the legality of possible evidence. In a situation where minutes could matter, the decision was not easy. After brief discussion, the senior officer decided to request an urgent search warrant while simultaneously sending a signal for reinforcement and a police special unit. While the police waited for official permission, a car hidden behind a small shed not far from the main building caught the officer's attention. It was a white Volkswagen transporter with open doors, already known to the investigators. A check of the license plates immediately confirmed. This was exactly the vehicle that had played a role in Leah's disappearance case 3 years ago. The interior inspection of the vehicle caused additional concern. The interior was literally strewn with children's things, clothing, toys, and school materials. Everything looked as if someone had recently and very hastily collected these items. The police crew again contacted the duty officer and transmitted information about the vehicle and the objects found in it. Soon, additional vehicles with forensic technicians and rapid response unit officers arrived. Meanwhile, the patrol officers again questioned Petteri Serku, who had called the police. The man seemed confident and insisted that he had come here by chance to collect mushrooms nearby. However, his reappearance in the environment of events again aroused police suspicion. It was not excluded that he himself might have been involved in Leah's detention and had intentionally called the police to divert suspicion from himself. Although Serku had already been cleared once by the investigation, the repeated incident forced the police to keep him under strict observation. Nevertheless, the main task remained the sawmill's basement. When the long-awaited search warrant finally arrived, the Special Operations Group quickly opened the self-made grate on the ventilation. Inside the opening, traces of fresh repairs, remnants of plywood and insulation material were clearly visible, reminiscent of the materials that teacher Hämäläinen had bought in Rovaniemi. However, what exactly was hidden inside, the police did not yet know. The investigators understood that if they went in without adequate preparation, they might accidentally destroy valuable evidence or scare away the perpetrator who might be nearby. Anyone could be inside, and extreme caution had to be exercised. The group of operatives carefully examined the entrance and ventilation. The cough no longer repeated, which increased the tension. The police were not sure whether anyone was still alive, or whether the sounds had been intentionally recorded and transmitted to divert attention. Negotiation specialists were prepared for any development of the situation, but the main question remained open. Soon, the head of the forensic department arrived at the site and immediately began examining the delivery van and the found objects. The evidence was carefully documented and prepared for later analysis. The investigators no longer doubted that the found transporter would definitively connect teacher Hämäläinen to the location of Leah's disappearance and the sawmill in Taatsi. The group leader spoke again with Petteri Serku, after which he asked the officers to temporarily restrict his freedom of movement until all details were verified. This was a usual precautionary measure, but it intensified the feeling of tension at the scene. The Oulu police and forensic technicians now clearly understood that this was a critical moment of the entire investigation. All threads converged exactly here at the abandoned sawmill far from civilization. The main question of what exactly was hidden behind the reinforced ventilation remained open, but everyone who was at that moment on the grounds of the old sawmill understood. The answer was very close. While the police prepared for the next step, forensic technicians carefully secured all found traces and evidence, knowing that each of their actions could now affect the fate of a person who had disappeared 3 years ago. 3rd of September 2022, exactly at 11:25, the police special unit opened the door to the basement room of the old sawmill. What was inside immediately confirmed the investigators' worst fears. In a small room lined with plywood and insulation material lay mortal remains. The autopsy later revealed that Leah had died no longer than a day before. Thus, she had lived exactly 1,095 days in captivity, almost 3 years since her disappearance. Just 1 hour after the discovery of the remains, patrol officers arrested teacher Risto Hämäläinen about 2 kilometers from the sawmill. During his arrest, antibiotics, baby food, and several SD cards were found in his bag. On these cards, forensic technicians later discovered shocking evidence, fragments of video recordings that covered the entire time of Leah's captivity. The teacher had used an autonomous offline recorder that he had already bought in 2019 and had recorded the daily life of the captive over 3 years. A careful examination of the crime scene enabled experts to definitively establish the teacher had spent considerable time in the room. His fingerprints and DNA traces were found in abundance on the walls, doors, furniture, and household items of the basement. Traffic camera recordings confirmed that Hämäläinen had personally made at least 3 nighttime trips with his white Volkswagen transporter from Oulu to Tatsi to bring mattresses, insulation material, and other household items necessary for long-term detention. During the investigation, information about tranquilizers for veterinary use was also discovered. A theft of a large quantity of such a preparation was reported at a pharmacy not far from Oulu. However, the police could never prove a connection between the teacher and the theft of these medications. This detail remained officially unresolved. During the court proceedings in spring 2024, new details came to light that definitively clarified the picture of the crime. When the judge asked about the motives for the act, Risto Hämäläinen calmly and confidently spoke a sentence that shocked all those present. "I saved Leah from the cruel world." Throughout the entire trial, his lawyer tried to have his client declared insane, claiming that the teacher was unable to perceive reality adequately. However, a conducted forensic psychiatric examination clearly refuted this version. The teacher was declared absolutely sane and aware of the consequences of his actions. During the trial, it became known that Leah's parents had no relationship whatsoever to the money that had been deposited to pay off the mortgage at the bank. This was exclusively the teacher's decision, who never revealed the source of this large cash sum. The Mäkelä family was completely rehabilitated in the eyes of the public, and the media version of a possible staging of the kidnapping out of greed was officially closed by the investigations and the court. The question with the neighbor witness Petri Sirku was also definitively clarified. It turned out that Sirku had participated in a video conference with colleagues from Helsinki on the 2nd of September 2019 at 3 o'clock, at the time of Leah's disappearance. This fact was confirmed by numerous witnesses and technical data from the provider. Thus, Sirku was completely removed from the list of suspects. On the 14th of May, 2024, the District Court of Oulu handed down the final verdict. Risto Hämäläinen was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life imprisonment. At the time of the sentencing, he smiled calmly and maintained a strange composure inappropriate for this situation. Police officers led him out of the courtroom in handcuffs, under the heavy silence of the audience. Exactly this image was the last that viewers saw. The broadcast was interrupted. After the case was closed, several questions remained under seal. No one could find out how Hämäläinen had obtained the large sum of money that had been given to Leah's parents. The recordings on the SD cards were partially sealed until the year 2035 to protect personal data and maintain confidentiality. As for the Mäkelä family, they decided to leave Oulu forever. They spent the rest of their lives in another part of Finland, away from the constant reminders of the terrible tragedy that had befallen their family. Thus ended one of the most sensational and tragic stories of modern Finland. In this case, cruelty and strange care, calculation and mental derangement intertwined. But despite all efforts by the police and justice system, the final answer to the most difficult question, what exactly drove the quiet and inconspicuous school teacher to such a crime, is known in full only to Risto Hämäläinen himself. And although the court officially closed this case, none of those who had followed the story of Leah's disappearance could finally free themselves from the feeling that behind this external clarity, something greater was hidden, something not quite comprehensible to a normal person. In the end, only silence remained, heavy and insurmountable, like the Nordic autumn in Oulu itself. It seemed to be an ordinary dinner of an ordinary family in a quiet suburb of Warsaw, until 8-year-old Zuzanna refused to finish her soup. 10 minutes later, the girl lost consciousness, and an hour later, experts discovered on her neck a trace that had obviously been left by someone else. Neighbors described the family as quiet and wealthy, but behind the cozy facade hid a secret that could overturn perceptions of what a mother is capable of. The 9th of March, 2024, did not differ from hundreds of similar days in the quiet, cozy suburb of Warsaw. In the kitchen of the 2-story house on Konopnica Street, Family B was having dinner, an ordinary, according to neighbors, even exemplary family. The mother, Monica B, the father, Marek B, an 8-year-old daughter, Zuzanna. At 18:55, something happened. The mother would later tell police, "She simply stopped moving and fell onto the table. I thought, a fainting spell." 10 minutes later, at 19:05, Monica called the rescue service and described her daughter's condition to the operator with a calm voice. The recording of this call contained neither excitement nor panic, which later aroused special interest from the investigation. The ambulance arrived after only a few minutes. Only 450 meters separated the B family house from the nearest rescue station, number 7. The medics tried to bring Zuzanna back to consciousness, but it was too late. The forensic medical examiner called to the scene immediately noticed an unusual detail. On the girl's neck was a dry, symmetrical groove 1.5 centimeters wide. The knot of the noose was obviously tightened from behind, which excluded a fall or accident, the beginning of rigor mortis, around 2015, which meant one thing. Between the incident and the call to the rescue service, only a few minutes had passed. But about what had really happened, the mother said nothing. Monica behaved reserved and evenly. She answered the police officer's questions laconically, avoided eye contact, and repeated that nothing unusual had happened. She had simply refused the food and lost consciousness. But the details discovered during examination of the scene did not at all confirm the version of a fainting spell. At the center of attention was the plate with barsh soup, borscht. 1/3 of the soup remained untouched. Forensic experts later determined that the plate had been doused with fresh hot broth immediately after the incident, which effectively destroyed the latent fingerprints of an adult person. Only the traces of Zuzanna's own fingers remained, which had neatly held the spoon. This looked unusual, as if someone had hastily tried to dispose of possible evidence. On the kitchen floor lay a fabric belt from a house robe, crumpled and carelessly thrown down. Exactly this belt would soon become the central piece of evidence, although at that time, no one gave it due importance. The investigators only photographed it and packed it in a plastic bag to send to the laboratory. In the house was another adult, the girl's father, Marek B. At the time of the incident, according to his words, he was watching a series on Netflix with headphones on the second floor and heard nothing. His calm and conviction that he saw and heard nothing later raised questions about the reality of his alibi. The B couple had not been noticed in open conflicts. However, the neighbor and babysitter Iwa K, who had recently been dismissed from work with the family for unclear reasons, later confessed to police that the atmosphere in the house had long been tense, though carefully hidden behind external prosperity. Another fragment of this story emerged literally the next day. The owner of a small cafe opposite the oil and gas station reported to police that he allegedly saw Iwa K's car parked in front of House B on the evening of the 9th of March. The recording from the oil and camera could have confirmed or refuted this statement, but its review was temporarily postponed, which created the first false trail that would mislead the investigation. Meanwhile, the pathologist clearly stated that the version of accidental suffocation or fall was completely excluded. This was a clear, conscious action, strong and precise. The person who did this understood the consequences of their actions, but for some reason did not intend to confess them. That same evening, police began establishing the first versions and planning interrogations. The first direction: the alibi of the father who was at home but allegedly noticed nothing. The second, checking the neighbor babysitter Iwa, who could have entered the house unnoticed and might have her own motives. And finally, Zuzana's mother, the only adult in the room who was directly next to her. The investigators had to find out what was hidden behind the external calm of family B, why the mother reacted so quickly and calmly to the tragedy, and to whom belonged the belt that became the central piece of evidence in the case. For now, the investigation had only begun. The police had too many questions and too few facts, because the truth, carefully hidden behind the everyday scene of family dinner, could be much more terrible than even the most experienced investigators of Warsaw suspected. Marek B. explains, "I was watching a series. The door was closed. Why didn't he hear a scream?" After the first interrogation, police decided to carefully check Marek B.'s version. At that time, the father's statement sounded simple and logical. "I heard nothing, was watching a series. The door was closed." However, in cases of this level, simplicity always arouses suspicion. It was necessary to establish how realistic his claim was, especially in the context of the discovered scream that was recorded by the house camera. The investigation examined the technical logs of devices in the B family house. The smart TV Samsung registered uninterrupted Netflix streaming from 1837 to 1912. The series that Marek was watching, a horror with loud sound effects that sometimes reached volume peaks of 80 decibels. Police also requested the Bluetooth protocol of the Sony WF-1000M3 headphones that belonged to Marek. The logs confirmed. The headphones were connected to the television and were in his ears during the entire episode. The built-in sensor confirmed that uninterrupted wearing of the device was registered from 1835 to 1915. The police conducted measurements directly at the crime scene. The closed door between living room and kitchen reduced sound by about 25 decibels. The additional distance from sofa to door was 4 meters and diminished volume by another 6 decibels. Thus, the scream that was recorded by the Xiaomi camera at 1855 and estimated at 85 decibels reached Marek at a level of about 54 decibels and was completely drowned out by the series sound stream. The second interrogation of Marek was based on careful clarifications of technical details. "Why didn't you remove the headphones when you heard an unusual sound?" Marek answered without the slightest doubt. "The series is full of strange and sharp sounds. I heard much similar in this episode and was sure the sound came from there. I didn't even think to check." "Were there interruptions in watching? Did you perhaps remove the headphones?" "No. The headphones sat firmly in my ears. The system automatically pauses the series if I remove them even for a second. That didn't happen," the father confirmed. The technical department confirmed Marek's words. The sensor control indeed registered no interruptions in watching and uninterrupted use of the device. However, despite the technical confirmations, police could not completely exclude Marek's involvement. The investigator, answering a press question that same day, intentionally allowed an ambiguous formulation. "The father is not excluded from the investigation. All variants are currently being considered." This phrase immediately drew journalists' attention and aroused public suspicions against Marek. Meanwhile, an important new detail emerged in another direction of the investigation. The surveillance camera at the Orlen gas station registered babysitter Iwa K's car at 1848, 9 kilometers from the B family house. The recording became the first step toward confirming the woman's alibi. However, investigators still had to reconstruct in detail her route in exactly those minutes when the tragic incident occurred in the house on Konopnica Street. Now, the investigation's focus shifted from technical details and external circumstances to a less obvious but more complex layer: intra-family relationships. Investigators began carefully studying the personality of the mother, Monica B., and the real atmosphere that prevailed within the family and was hidden behind the outwardly prosperous facade. A month after the tragic incident, investigators' attention shifted from technical details and alibis to deeply hidden family problems. The need became obvious to better understand Zuzana's personality itself and the atmosphere surrounding her. The first alarming signal that caught police attention were records from the Municipal Social Service. On the 12th of October 2023, social workers registered a strange phrase that Monica B. uttered during a visit. "In my house, nobody throws away food." The mother's words at that time aroused no serious suspicions, but after the events of the 9th of March, took on a completely different coloring. Neighbors of the family confirmed, already in the summer of 2023, sharp, insistent screams from Monica regularly emanated from the house. "Eat to the end." These incidents were not isolated. Neighbors noticed that Zuzana usually looked dejected and withdrawn after such episodes. The school doctor also added an important but disturbing detail. In September 2023, he noticed small bruises on Zuzana's hands, but no official measures were taken. The doctor explained to police that he saw no signs of serious threat in this and attributed the injuries to ordinary children's games. Now these bruises became important fragments of the puzzle that was coming together into an unpleasant picture of domestic violence. Investigators again summoned Marek and Monica B. for questioning to clarify these details. The parents categorically denied ever applying any measures of physical punishment or coercion regarding food. Their answers sounded identical, as if rehearsed in advance. "We never had problems with food, let alone coercion." But the collected witness statements completely contradicted the parents' words. The parents reacted sharply and with obvious irritation to the social service records and neighbors' testimonies. This particularly affected the mother, Monica B., who became less restrained with each new interrogation and repeated that the neighbors are simply making things up to get in the newspapers. Investigators meanwhile studied Zuzana's medical records. They established systematic complaints from the girl about stomach pains, beginning in the summer of 2023. The pediatrician who repeatedly examined her could find no medical causes for these symptoms. At that time, they were attributed to nervous tension, without questioning what the causes of stress might be for an 8-year-old person. Unexpectedly, Zuzana's grandfather came into the investigation's focus. Joseph P., 72 years old, former military man, advocate of strict educational methods. In one of the previous interviews, a neighbor mentioned that the grandfather often scolded the parents for weakness and excessive mildness toward his granddaughter. The investigation carefully checked his whereabouts on the day of the tragedy. Joseph lived in a nursing home in Tomaszów Lubelski, 48 kilometers from Warsaw. The PKS bus, his only available means of transport, traveled in the opposite direction, from Warsaw to Tomaszów, from 1710 to 1835, and in no way allowed the grandfather to reach the B. family house at the time of the incident. Surveillance cameras in the nursing home dining room also confirmed his presence at dinner at 1850. However, investigators did not hurry to definitively close this version, as the strictness of his educational methods could theoretically influence the family atmosphere from a distance by shaping the parents' attitude toward Zuzana. Meanwhile, the most important material evidence of the case, the fabric belt from the housecoat, awaited laboratory examination. The report that could answer the question of who exactly held the belt at the time of the incident was scheduled only for the 20th of April. This very piece of evidence could definitively confirm or refute suspicions against the mother, father, or someone else from the immediate circle. Investigators had not yet announced to the general public their wait for the results. For them, it was now more important to create a psychological portrait of the family, to understand what relationships Zuzana really had with her parents, and what educational methods were hidden behind the prosperous external facade of the house on Konopnica Street. Now the investigation's attention definitively focused on the material evidence, the housecoat belt. It was supposed to definitively clarify who was next to Zuzana in the critical minutes. Until receiving the expert results, investigators had several days left, which they decided to use maximally productively. By studying in detail the victim's family and environment, in order to have a clear picture by the time of the investigations. Decisive phase. 3 weeks after examining the family circumstances, the investigation approached the final phase. Investigators received unexpected results from the IT laboratory, which was able to restore an important audio segment from the domestic Xiaomi camera installed in the kitchen. This was a small camera attached to the wall at a height of 170 centimeters with the help of a screw mount that excluded accidental movement. The restored audio fragment registered sounds lasting less than 1 minute. Distinct knocking, muffled wheezing, and characteristic rustling of fabric. These sounds coincided temporally with the previously registered scream at 1855, but remained hidden until now. The investigation was interested in the reason why the camera did not visually record the incident itself. Analysis of the device's metadata provided an important answer. 7 minutes before the incident, the lens was intentionally turned upward, which completely excluded visual observation of the kitchen. Criminal experts discovered a clear sweat grease trace on the camera housing. Verification through the AFIS system yielded a flawless match. The trace belonged to Monica B. This directly connected the mother for the first time with an attempt to hide the circumstances of the tragedy. A new important detail was information from an unexpected witness. The in-post delivery service courier Piotr L. told investigators that on the day of the incident at 1852, he saw exactly Monica through the kitchen window. According to him, she looked irritated, gestured nervously, and was obviously saying something, although he could not understand the words. This data became decisive for understanding who was in the kitchen 3 minutes before the scream. IT experts carefully checked the recording for falsification. An independent phonospectral examination confirmed the authenticity of the restored fragment. No signs of editing or other sound manipulations were found, which completely excluded any attempt at evidence fabrication. Investigators carefully checked the possibility of accidental camera rotation. One scenario assumed that the door could have touched the device and rotated the lens. However, after detailed reconstruction and measurements, this variant was completely rejected. The kitchen door opened inward, and the trajectory of its movement could not physically coincide with the direction in which the camera was turned. The conclusion was obvious, and the only possible one. The device was turned intentionally and consciously. The investigation definitively dismissed the version about possible involvement of Zuzana's grandfather, Joseph P. The surveillance camera data from the nursing home in Tomaszów convincingly confirmed his presence at dinner at 1850. From that minute, the grandfather definitively left the list of suspects and closed the false trail that had previously misled the investigators. However, the most important discovery that definitively turned the course of the investigation was the official KGP report on the laboratory examination of the bathrobe belt found at the crime scene. Using the latest LR-mix method and current KGP databases from 2024, experts determined that Monica's sweat and microfibers from Zuzana's t-shirt were clearly present on the belt. The probability of a random match of these two biological traces was astronomically low, 1 in a million. This piece of evidence connected Monica directly and indisputably to the incident for the first time. The prosecutor's office immediately received the report and began formulating an official charge against the mother. Monica B. found herself for the first time since the beginning of the investigation in the position of a person against whom irrefutable physical evidence existed that left no room for maneuvering or alternative explanations. Now the investigation entered the decisive phase. With evidence that could not be denied, the prosecutor's office concentrated its efforts on examining the motive as well as determining the circumstances of the staging that Zuzana's mother sought to implement to hide the true nature of what happened. On the 17th of February 2025, the courtroom of the district court in Zamość filled with journalists, relatives, and random observers. Almost a year of investigation was finally approaching its logical conclusion. The prosecutor's office read the final conclusions, confirmed by irrefutable evidence and witness testimony. The sequence of events presented by the prosecution formed a harsh and indisputable chain. According to case materials and numerous witness testimonies, Systematic pressure on Zuzana from the mother began long before the March incident. Documents from the Municipal Social Service OPS from October 2023 recorded urgent statements by Monica that, "In her house, no one has the right to throw away food." This was the first alarming signal that no one took seriously at the time. Neighbors, who previously had not been too willing to speak with police, gave testimony about systematic food coercion, accompanied by screams, "Eat to the end." Such episodes repeated regularly. Zuzana's complaints about stomach pains, previously incomprehensible to doctors, were now logically connected with stress from her mother's constant pressure. The most convincing piece of evidence in the case remained the bathrobe belt discovered that evening in the family's kitchen. Experts confirmed that precisely this belt became the tool that left a trace 1.5 centimeters wide on Zuzana's neck, which completely matched the fabric texture. Clear traces of Monica's DNA profile and microfibers from Zuzana's clothing were found on the belt. The expertise excluded any probability of random coincidence and declared a probability ratio of 1 in a million. Confirmation of the targeted intention to hide the truth was the Xiaomi camera mounted in the kitchen. 7 minutes before the incident, the device's lens was turned upward, which excluded the possibility of visual recording of the event. Sweat and grease traces on the device housing matched Monica's fingerprints. The court recognized that the manipulation of the camera was consciously performed for the purpose of concealing evidence. Another key detail was the recording from the house camera, which registered sounds at exactly 18:55, distinct knocking, gasping, and the sound of rubbing fabric. Expertise confirmed the authenticity of the audio and completely excluded the possibility of montage. At this time, family father Marek was on the second floor watching a series with headphones, which was technically confirmed by Bluetooth logs and sound level measurements. His lack of reaction became an additional factor that strengthened the prosecution's version. The prosecutors separately mentioned the call to emergency services. Psycholinguistic expertise registered a non-normative pause in Monica's speech during the 112 call. The court did not consider this piece of evidence fundamental, but noted it in the case materials as an additional factor characterizing the defendant's psychological state at the critical moment. All alternative versions of what happened were presented to the court and refuted. Babysitter Iwa K.'s alibi was definitively confirmed by video recordings from the Orlen gas station. Zuzana's grandfather, Josef P., was also completely excluded from suspects thanks to clear video recording from the nursing home. False versions about accidental camera displacement were carefully examined and closed by criminal experts. The court paid special attention to the soup bowl, on which only Zuzana's fingerprints remained. This meant that Monica did not feed her daughter that evening, but only observed her, exerted psychological pressure, and forced her to finish the meal completely, which became the immediate cause of the conflict. When the judge read the final verdict, 25 years of imprisonment under Article 148, Paragraph 1 of the Criminal Code of the Republic of Poland, Monica lost her composure for the first time during the entire trial. She jumped up and shouted toward the judge, "That's a lie!" The bailiffs quickly led her out of the courtroom. The case of the tragedy on Konopnicka Street, which had long been at the center of media and public attention, was officially and irrevocably closed. The next day, the 18th of February 2025, the local newspaper Dziennik Wschodni briefly reported on the verdict, stating the harsh end of a story that remained long in the memory of Warsaw residents. The investigation and court unconditionally established and confirmed the main facts: the identity of the criminal, her tool, as well as the nature of the staging. Judicial and technical details were carefully registered and documented. Nevertheless, some episodes from the B family's past remained unclear. The bruises that the school doctor had previously noticed and possible previous cases of violence were never legally proven and remained outside the official documents, never entering the case materials.